Good morning. Good morning. Okay. So today we're going to be um, undertaking a conversation where you're going to be advocating for a particular position. And the, just to remind you, the topic of discussion is that adverse possession is a way to prevent violence over conflicting claims to land. So the first step in this process is we're going to put you guys into breakout rooms. Let me, yeah, the audio seems to be working on my end. So you may want to step out and then come back in and give it another go. But if it continues to be a problem, we'll see if we can find a solution. So we're going to put you guys into breakout rooms, one for each side of the discussion, and give you a few minutes to sort of pool your thoughts and get together. Okay, so it occurs to me that I told Kiera to step out and come back in, and she can't hear. So let me put that in the chat for her. Okay, so let me create the breakout rooms for you guys. And what we're going to do is there's going to be 2 breakout rooms. You're going to get to choose your side up to a point. And when I say up to a point, the reason for that is I think the negative has a harder position in this discussion, because the assigned reading makes an argument for the affirmative. And so I think that putting a slight unbalance, when there's an odd number of people here, having a slight unbalance in the favor of the negative gives you more perspectives, more brains to sort of bring to the problem. So there are 7 students in the room. So there are 3 seats in the affirmative room and 4 in the negative room. So let me rename them so that you know which is which. So Kira, can you hear me now? So okay, so first 3 to go into the affirmative room can go in. First 4 to go into the negative room, if you prefer the negative. So if you can't, there've been a couple of times in earlier tutorials where people could not find the link to join a particular room. And so if you just want to say which side you want to go into, I can assign you as long as there are seats available in that room. So. Kiri, you came off mute and I heard something. Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, so we just lost someone. We lost Chris. I guess she's having technical issues. So 3 on the affirmative, 3 on the negative. Who wants to join one side or the other? Okay, so Bryce wants to go in the affirmative. Mundell, I think that some of the versions of Zoom are providing links and some aren't. So I'm not sure. So if you can't see it, just tell me which side you want to be on, and if there are seats on that side, I'll assign you. So, okay, so that fills the affirmative room. So everybody else that waited gets to go into the negative. So. What's the holdup, guys? Hello?
Good morning, sir. I just joined, so I'm just wondering what's happening.
Well, we're trying to move into breakout rooms so that you guys can talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes on the question I sent out, and then come back and reconvene. So,
This is the Charlotte Williams
yep,
thingamajiggy.
yep.
Oh, I didn't get a chance to read it. Couldn't find it.
I mean, if you Googled the title, you found there was uh, a free download from the University of Washington.
All right, let me try again.
In the meantime, you should move into the breakout room and start having a conversation with your classmates. And
Also, we were just supposed to be talking about some stuff for ideas and stuff.
I'm sorry?
In the breakup groups, we were going to, I guess, see everyone's point of view and stuff.
You broke up in the middle there.
I was asking if in the breakup groups we were gonna give our points of views and whether we agree or disagree.
So you were supposed to basically the idea was you were going to pick a side, and this was going to be an opportunity to draw out conversation on both sides of an issue. Looks like the negative was a little short-handed due to some technical issues. So let's start by hearing from the affirmative, right? So the topic again is that adverse possession can be used to prevent violence over conflicting claims to land. So what do you have to say in support of the question?
Hi, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The question is, right here in the chat. So the question is for our affirmative colleagues, what do they have to offer us?
I think it does, but I'm kind of in between on the statement.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Because while I think yes, it does prevent like violence over who gets what. At the same time, I feel like people are just like, you can't really like predict people sometimes, if you get what I'm saying. So it's not sort of like, it's more so much like you can't stop people from being violent, not violent, but even though sometimes there's a clear thing of who gets what, there's still conflict.
So as I understand your argument is that because adverse possession can't solve all the violence that may arise out of conflicting claims to land, we shouldn't use it to solve any of the violence.
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't use it to solve any, but it's
Okay.
more so that I think all cannot be solved using it, if you understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so does that make it a bad policy choice from that perspective, because it can't solve every instance of the problem that it wants to solve?
I guess so. Because when you're making a policy, you want to make it the most efficient.
Okay. So the argument is that if we can't solve everything, then we should solve nothing.
Kind of ish.
Okay. What does that mean? And then Kira will hear from you.
Because I feel like even though it won't solve everything, at the same time, if that's the best possible thing right now, if you understand what I'm saying. Like sometimes certain things that everything cannot be solved. So I think if that's the strongest option that we have.
Okay.
And
this seems right to me. Kira, go ahead. Kira?
Yeah, I thought Kristen was still saying something. That's why I didn't start speaking.
No, it's fine.
Okay, so I am also in between with the statement. I don't think that it necessarily prevents violence, but I do think that adverse possession, the doctrine, helps to solve conflicting claims. So I think it's more of a practical or like a legal way to solve, who this property belongs to, but I don't think that it necessarily solves the violence aspect. And as Kristen says, it's because you can't necessarily control what persons do. So, if I own a piece of property and I catch someone's on my property, like some persons might say, hey, this is my land, get off of it, and others might react in a violent way. So I don't think that it necessarily prevents violence, but I do think that it helps of like who has the right property. So if a property is abandoned and someone's there for the right amount of years, they make improvements to the land and whatever else, then you could say that they rightfully gained rights to the property. And there's critiques about the doctrine about it isn't fair that someone's right to their own property is like being thrown out the window, but at the same time, the doctrine helps to make use of the land. So instead of having land and property just there sitting doing nothing, there's other people out there who is willing to use it for a good cause. So Yeah, I would say that the doctrine, it doesn't prevent violence, but it does help to solve, who has right to land and what's not.
But what about Charlotte Williams's argument that adverse possession is we have this particular edge case in Timor-Leste where successive occupation systems have actually created multiple valid legal claims to the same piece of property, depending on the legal regime under which that title was issued. And her argument is that adverse possession is a mechanism to adjudicate those claims and enable the system in Timor-Leste to sort of determine who the owner is without having to make value judgments about which system of title is superior to the other. Because she argues that there's not really a principled way to distinguish between the systems of title. None of them are perfect. None of them are significantly more flawed than any of the others. So her argument is that adverse possession is a mechanism for, giving us a principled way to determine who owns land without having to resort to violence. Does that argument not carry any weight for you?
I think it would carry weight if people abide to the policies. So with adverse possession, if you what's the acronym again? Chain. If you follow, if you satisfy all the elements, then there's no need to resort to violence. It's because the person has satisfied the criteria, so they legally have the rights to the property. But I think it boils down to whether people are willing to abide and accept the doctrine, because if someone satisfies the criteria and you abandon one to make them to not use my property. I think it boils down to whether people abide to the principle.
So it sounds like, as I understand it, because you broke up a little in the middle, so I may not have heard everything, but as I understand what you're saying, it sounds like your argument is that the larger problem is sort of a systemic legitimacy problem, right? That even if adverse possession is a mechanism for resolving or adjudicating these claims, that if the system is not seen as a legitimate way to resolve disputes sort of broadly, then the adoption of a doctrine, no matter how efficient it may be, isn't going to solve the problem of self-help. Is that sort of would you say that's a fair rendering of your argument?
Sorry, I just got kicked off my internet job, so I didn't hear anything that you said.
So the compressed version is that if folks don't trust the courts, it doesn't matter whether the system that the courts use is fair or not.
Right, right. Yes, that's basically what it boils down to, because you would always have law-abiding citizens, but there's always going to be this 1% that feels, no, this is wrong, and yes, it's the law, but I don't agree with it, so I'm not going to follow it. So I just think it depends on the
Well,
person.
well, I certainly hope that, if we have a case of a, widespread injustice, that more than 1% of the population would feel strongly enough about it to push back. But that's my own sort of bomb throwing revolutionary stripes coming through. So let's bring it a little closer to home, because the Charlotte Williams article focuses on Timor-Leste, which is an interesting case and gives us some really helpful sort of boundary conditions to think about. But it's on the other side of the world. Who cares? Let's talk about some cases that are a little closer to home. And that's specifically, right? I'm sure you guys know, since you're in the region, I only learned about it very recently, about the major volcanic eruption in Montserrat 25 years ago, right? And the fact that because of that eruption, 2/3 of the island of Montserrat is uninhabitable, right? The government does not allow people to go to the southern 2/3 of the island. So prior to 1995, all of that land was occupied. It was used. Stuff happened in there. I mean, Montserrat's capital is in the exclusion zone. So my question is, there will come a point where the volcanologists will decide that it is safe to go back, right? That occupation can resume. And there's a strong possibility that the exclusion zone is going to actually be quite wealthy as an agricultural resource because of the additional minerals deposited by the volcano. Who should own that property, right? Should the old title owner own it? What if it takes 100 years for the government to decide that it's safe to go back? What if we can't determine who's the title owner? What do we do then? A clean slate. Okay, I think that's absolutely a reasonable policy response. It's a rational policy response. It is something that could happen. Just the government expropriates all of it and starts over from scratch. Does that seem fair to the folks who owned it and maybe had, put some time and money into investing and working that property?
I think that there's nothing that could be 100% fair. Like, in every decision, there's always someone who would get the the worst end of the stick. So it all depends on which 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 policy would have greater would have how to say it, like the pros outweighs the cons basically.
So you are absolutely right, right? Let me start by saying you are absolutely right that no matter what you are doing in policymaking, there are always trade-offs. And I think that one of the problems of law, and this is not a comment about the Caribbean or the United States or the common law, it is a comment about law, is that we want to pretend in law that there are no trade-offs, that that when we make a decision, that there was never a world in which the decision could have gone the other way. Okay. But in fact, the mechanisms that we use to decide disputes in law fundamentally carry the expectation that things could have gone the other way. Right? There is no legal system, at least not in the common law, without adversarialness, without the ability of both sides to ask for a resolution in their favor. So I think that it's very easy for lawyers in particular, when they are engaged in policymaking, to forget that there are trade-offs, that there are choices, that there are costs, that we don't have to do things the way that we like, that there are alternatives that we have to explore. One other case that is not as close to home as Montserrat, but it's it's close to home for me. So I grew up in Mississippi, about 70 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. And Mississippi is unlike most of the American Gulf Coast in that when I was growing up, the Mississippi Gulf Coast consisted mostly of fairly small parcels of property owned by single owners or family owners with small residential homes on it. Most of the rest of the Gulf Coast, Florida, Alabama, Texas, the coastal properties are overwhelmingly large condo towers and resorts owned by sort of big businesses. But that may be starting to change because after a hurricane in 2005, most coastal property owners in Mississippi can't rebuild because they can't get their property insured anymore because insurers just won't issue policies. And so what happens is the entire Gulf Coast goes from being a residential community to being unlivable, right? It's just a series of concrete slabs that homes used to stand on. And this is a policy problem. and it requires policy choices. And it may be that adverse possession is part of the package of policy choices that could help to resolve this. Maybe, as Bryce suggests in Montserrat, maybe the state of Mississippi should just seize all of the coastal properties and sort of start over from scratch. There are other reasons why in the United States that's not as viable an option, but those aren't worth going into. But these are real questions that affect real people that have to have real answers. And I think that it's important for you guys as sort of the future policymakers in the region and the future professionals to be thinking about what are these, how are you going to solve these problems when they present themselves? The case of Montserrat is not going to be the last case. Bonnie, you said exactly what I was about to say, right? Montserrat's not going to be the last time that significant portions of a Caribbean island are rendered uninhabitable by a natural disaster, right? And they're going to become more frequent. And we should be thinking now about how we want to develop the law to be able to respond to these disasters in a just and fair and hopeful way. So what questions do you guys have before we wrap it up? No questions? Last chance? Okay. Well, then I will see you guys tomorrow. I really appreciate your hard work and your engagement today, and I will let you go. Take care, and bye.